Where are you watching from? Because this story begins in a quiet American town where people think they know everything about you, until the truth stands up at a funeral. They never liked my second husband. Not from the beginning. Not even a little. To my family, he was an embarrassment, someone I should have hidden, not married. They called him the gardener. And worse, they said it like it explained everything. I'm Ruth Miller, 68 years old, born and raised in small-town America where everyone smiles to your face and judges you behind lace curtains. I buried my first husband after 42 years of marriage. I survived grief, loneliness, and the quiet fear that comes when the house gets too silent at night. When I met Henry, I wasn't looking for love. I was just looking for someone who listened. Henry wore old boots and sun-faded shirts. His hands were rough, his voice calm. He smelled like earth and rain, not cologne. He worked quietly, never raised his voice, and always arrived early. When he spoke, people leaned in, not because he was loud, but because he was careful. I noticed that. My children didn't. Mom, a gardener? My daughter sighed when I told her. My son laughed outright. Is he at least good at it? They didn't ask if he was kind. They didn't ask if he made me feel safe. They didn't ask if he held my hand when my knees ached. They just asked how it looked. At family gatherings, Henry stood politely to the side. He poured drinks. He offered help. And every time, my daughter-in-law would say it. Oh, don't worry, Henry. You're used to this kind of work. She smiled when she said it. That made it worse. I wanted to defend him. But Henry would gently squeeze my hand and whisper, "Let it go, Ruth. Peace is expensive. Don't waste it." So I stayed quiet. And my family mistook my silence for agreement. When we married, it was a small ceremony. Just us, a pastor, and 2 witnesses. No one from my side came. Later my son said, "We didn't think it was serious." But Henry took my last name anyway. Said it mattered. Years passed quietly. Henry worked in the garden behind our modest home. I baked. We drank coffee on the porch. At night, he told me stories about places he'd been, people he'd known, lessons learned the hard way. He never bragged. That should have told me something. Then he got sick. Not suddenly. Slowly. Doctor's visits turned into hospital stays. Conversations turned into goodbyes whispered too early. On his last night, Henry held my face gently. "Ruth," he said softly, "promise me something." "Anything," I cried. "When the time comes. Let them listen." I didn't understand then, but I promised. The funeral was crowded. My family came. Dressed well. Somber faces. Polite condolences. Some even whispered. He did well for himself, marrying her. As if I were the achievement. Henry's lawyer arrived late. Tall man. Dark suit. Briefcase clasped tight. He asked for me. Only me. Then he stood at the front and cleared his throat. "I'm here to read the will of Henry Miller," he said. My daughter leaned toward my son. "Can gardeners even have wills?" They laughed quietly. The lawyer heard. He paused and looked directly at them. "This may take some time," he said calmly, "because Mr. Miller's life was not simple." The room went silent. I felt my hands shake. Henry's words echoed in my mind. "When the time comes, let them listen." And that's when I knew. They were about to learn who my husband really was. They thought they buried a gardener, but they were about to uncover a legacy. The lawyer didn't rush. That alone unsettled everyone. People expect bad news to come quickly. They expect goodbyes to be short. But this man stood at the podium like time belonged to him, and somehow to Henry. "I'll begin," he said, "by clarifying something." He looked around the room. Henry Miller was not a gardener by trade. A murmur rippled through the pews. My daughter straightened in her seat. My son frowned. The lawyer continued. He gardened because he loved it. I felt my throat tighten. That was true. Henry used to say the soil listened better than people did. The lawyer opened the briefcase. Inside were folders, thick ones. Henry Miller, he said, was a private man. Deliberately so. But he left instructions that, upon his passing, his story be told accurately. He glanced at me, briefly, gently, then back to the room. Henry never talked about his early years in detail. I knew he wasn't born poor, but he lived simply. I knew he had traveled, but he never showed photos. I knew he was educated, but he never corrected anyone who assumed otherwise. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was why. Mr. Miller, the lawyer said, earned his degree in civil engineering in the late 1970s. Someone gasped. Later, he continued, he founded a private infrastructure consultancy specializing in municipal court systems, public buildings, and civic redevelopment. My son leaned forward. "Excuse me," he muttered. The lawyer raised an eyebrow but didn't stop. For over 3 decades, Henry Miller worked behind the scenes, designing, funding, and rebuilding courthouses, records offices, and judicial facilities across 3 states. Silence. The kind that presses on your ears. I remembered Henry coming home tired, not dirty, just thoughtful. I remembered his phone calls that stopped when I entered the room. I remembered him once saying, "Power works best when it's invisible." I hadn't understood then. He stepped away from public business 15 years ago, the lawyer said, after a corporate betrayal that nearly cost him his life. The word betrayal landed heavily. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered, "Who was he?" The lawyer answered without turning. "Someone who learned that peace is more valuable than recognition." My daughter-in-law laughed nervously. "This is some kind of exaggeration, right?" she said. "He cut my lawn." The lawyer finally looked at her. "No, ma'am," he said evenly. "He chose your lawn." That shut her up. He held up a document. Henry Miller transferred the majority of his assets into blind trusts years ago. These include land holdings, investment stakes, and... He paused. Significant ownership interests in companies that now operate publicly. The word publicly hung in the air like smoke. I saw it then. The slow dawning realization. The glances. The sudden stiffness. My son stood. This has to be wrong," he said. "My wife and I, our company." The lawyer nodded. "Yes. That company." Every head turned. My daughter-in-law's face drained of color. "Henry Miller," the lawyer said calmly, "was the original silent investor in Westbridge Development Group." Gasps. Someone dropped a program. Westbridge. Their company. The one they bragged about. The one that funded their lifestyle. The one they never once thanked anyone for. "But he sold his shares years ago, right?" my son said quickly. The lawyer smiled faintly. "No." I felt my heart race. "He placed them in a trust," the lawyer continued, "with one condition." He looked at me. That the trust remain dormant unless his wife, Mrs. Ruth Miller, was ever publicly humiliated, dismissed, or treated as lesser by his family. The room erupted. Shouts. Whispers. Denials. My daughter-in-law stood, trembling. "That's absurd." The lawyer held up another document. "Not at all." "He believed," the lawyer said, voice steady. "That character is revealed not in success, but in how people treat those they believe have no power." I closed my eyes. "Henry." "The trust was activated," the lawyer continued, "the moment Mrs. Miller was insulted during a legal proceeding 3 months ago." My breath caught. 3 months ago. The courthouse. The moment she called me just the help. The lawyer snapped the folder shut. "And now," he said, "we proceed to the will." They thought they knew where the money came from. They thought power belonged to them. But they were about to learn. Henry planned everything. The lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room was already holding its breath. Henry Miller's will, he said, was revised 6 months ago. My daughter-in-law's hands clenched in her lap. My son stared straight ahead, jaw tight, as if refusing to look at me might undo what was happening. The lawyer opened a thick, cream-colored envelope. This document, he continued, was notarized, witnessed, and filed according to state law. He paused. And yes, before anyone asks, it is ironclad. That word landed hard. Henry had asked me once, gently, "Ruth, if something happened to me, would you be okay standing alone?" I had laughed then. "I've been standing alone my whole life," I told him. He smiled. "I know. That's why this matters." The will, the lawyer said, contains 3 primary sections. He lifted one finger. First, personal bequests. He looked at me. To Mrs. Ruth Miller, my client's wife, Henry leaves his private residence, all personal accounts, and full control of the Miller family trust. A wave of whispers surged. Control. Not inheritance. Control. My daughter-in-law shot to her feet. "That trust funds our company." The lawyer nodded calmly. "Yes, it does." Her face crumpled. He lifted a second finger. Second, conditional bequests. The room went silent. To Henry's adult children, he read, he leaves continued access to trust dividends, provided they maintain a respectful and supportive relationship with my wife. My son swallowed. "What does that mean?" he asked. The lawyer met his eyes. "It means," he said, "your behavior determines your income." Gasps. Anger. Fear. I had never wanted this. But Henry had. The lawyer lifted the third finger. Third, corrective clauses. I felt my heart pound. This section activates when deceit, exploitation, or public humiliation occurs. He glanced briefly at my daughter-in-law. This clause was triggered. "I object," she shouted. The judge raised a hand. "Sit down," he said sharply. She did. Barely. Under the corrective clause, the lawyer continued. Henry Miller's shares in Westbridge Development Group, held quietly through layered entities, are transferred. He paused. To Mrs. Ruth Miller. The room exploded. "No. That's impossible. She doesn't know anything about business." My son looked at me as if seeing a stranger. I felt small. Then, steady. The lawyer wasn't finished. "In addition," he said, "Mrs. Miller is granted voting control over 3 subsidiary companies and veto authority over executive compensation." My daughter-in-law's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She knew. She finally understood. I remembered every dinner where she corrected my posture. Every time she introduced me without my name. Every time she laughed when someone assumed I was the maid. Henry remembered too. Furthermore, the lawyer said, Mrs. Miller will assume Henry's philanthropic role in judicial infrastructure funding. The judge leaned forward. "You're saying," he said slowly, "she now funds?" "Yes," the lawyer replied, "more than half the county's court operations." The irony was unbearable. I was just the help. And yet, the system ran on Henry's money. And now, on mine. My daughter-in-law broke down then. "This is revenge," she cried. The lawyer shook his head. "No," he said softly. "This is consequence." I stood. My knees trembled, but my voice didn't. "I never wanted power," I said. "I wanted respect." The room stilled. I cooked meals. I cleaned quietly. I showed up when no one noticed. I looked at her. "You mistook my silence for weakness." The judge cleared his throat. "This court," he said, "recognizes the will as valid." The gavel came down. Bang. Just like that. Everything changed. My son looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. "Mom," he whispered. I didn't answer. Because chapter 3 wasn't about forgiveness. It was about truth. They thought the will was the end. They were wrong. Because Henry didn't just leave money behind. He left instructions. Power doesn't announce itself. It settles. Slowly. Uncomfortably. After the gavel fell, no one rushed toward me. No congratulations. No apologies. Just space, wide and deliberate, like the room itself was relearning where to place me. I felt it in the way conversations stopped when I passed. In the way eyes followed me, not with pity anymore but caution. I had crossed an invisible line. The first call came the next morning. A number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Miller," a man said carefully, "this is the interim director of Westbridge Development." Interim. I almost smiled. "We need to discuss your expectations going forward." My expectations. I looked at the kitchen window. The same sink. The same faded curtains. The same hands that had washed dishes quietly for years. "I expect honesty," I said. "And respect." There was a pause. "Yes, ma'am." By noon, the emails started. Board requests. Meeting invitations. Legal confirmations. All addressed to Ruth Miller. Not Henry's wife. Not family member. Just me. My daughter-in-law didn't call. But she sent a message. A long one. Angry. Panicked. Carefully worded enough to sound civil. She asked for a meeting. I agreed. She arrived overdressed, like armor. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup. The same woman who once told me, "Please don't embarrass us, just sit quietly." She didn't sit quietly now. "You blindsided us," she said. I folded my hands. "No," I replied calmly. "You ignored us." Her lips tightened. "You let everyone think you were nothing." I met her gaze. "I never let you think that," I said. "You needed to." She leaned forward. "You don't understand how business works." I smiled. Not cruelly. Just tired. "I cleaned houses for 40 years, I said. "I understand contracts, leverage, and consequences very well." Her eyes flickered. She knew she'd underestimated me. Again. My son came later that evening. No suit. No confidence. Just a man who finally realized his silence had cost him everything. "I didn't stop her," he said. "I know," I replied. "I didn't think it mattered." That hurt more than anything she'd ever said. "I loved Henry," he added. "I know." I stood and placed a hand on his arm. "He loved you too," I said softly. "That's why he made you accountable." He nodded, tears filling his eyes. "I don't know how to fix this." I looked at him. "Neither did I said. "But I learned." The newspapers ran the story quietly. No headlines. Just whispers in business columns. Unexpected transfer of control. Widow assumes voting authority. Philanthropic shift in county infrastructure. But word spread. The maid. The gardener's wife. The woman no one noticed. At the next board meeting, someone asked if I'd like the head seat. I declined. "I prefer to listen first," I said. But when I spoke, they listened. Every word. At home, I still brewed tea the same way. Still folded laundry carefully. Still spoke softly. Power hadn't changed me. It had clarified me. My daughter-in-law sent another message. Shorter this time. Less confident. She asked if we could start fresh. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because forgiveness isn't immediate. It's earned. That night, I stood in the garden Henry loved. The soil was dark. The air cold. I whispered, "You did this." The wind moved through the trees. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt steady. They thought the story was about inheritance. They were wrong. The final chapter isn't about what I gained. It's about what they lost forever. The loudest victories don't echo. They settle into silence. Weeks passed after the funeral, after the board meetings, after the whispers faded into facts. Life didn't transform overnight. I still woke early. Still made tea the same way Henry liked it, strong, with a little honey. Still walked slowly through the garden he had tended with his own hands. But something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer invisible. And strangely, that wasn't the greatest gift he left me. The house felt different. Not bigger. Not richer. Just honest. No more pretending. No more shrinking myself to make others comfortable. I moved through rooms without apology. Sat at tables without asking permission. Spoke without softening my truth. Power hadn't hardened me. It had unburdened me. My daughter-in-law came again. This time without makeup. Without armor. She stood in the doorway like someone unsure of the rules. I don't know how to talk to you anymore, she admitted. I considered that. Then speak honestly, I said. She swallowed. I was afraid you'd take everything. I nodded. So you took my dignity first. She didn't argue. That mattered. I grew up believing worth was loud, she said quietly. That power was performance. I looked at her. I grew up believing survival was silence, I replied. And both beliefs cost us something. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. I don't expect forgiveness, she whispered. I didn't rush to give it. Because forgiveness without accountability is just another kind of erasure. My son joined us later. He stood between us, older than I remembered, smaller than he'd once seemed. I failed you, he said to me. Yes, I answered. Then I took his hand. But you're here now. He broke down then. And I let him. Because strength doesn't mean denying grief. It means surviving it. In the months that followed, the company changed. Quietly. Decisively. Programs were funded. Workers protected. Contributions redirected toward public good, not image management. Henry had always believed wealth was stewardship. Now, it finally was. People began to ask about me. They wanted interviews. Features. A story. I declined most of them. Because this was never about recognition. It was about correction. One evening, I received a letter. Handwritten. From a young woman studying law. She wrote that she'd grown up watching her mother clean offices late at night. That she'd been told power wasn't for people like them. Then she'd heard my story. And decided otherwise. I held that letter for a long time. That was the real inheritance. On Christmas Eve, I set the table. Not extravagantly. Just warmly. Candles. Simple food. Real conversation. My daughter-in-law cooked beside me. My son set the plates. No hierarchy. No silence. Just presence. Before dinner, I stood. They looked up, uncertain. I want to say something, I said gently. I was called, just the help. I was underestimated. Dismissed. I paused. But I was never powerless. I looked around the table. And neither are you, unless you give someone permission to define your worth. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Later that night, alone in the garden, I whispered again. Thank you, Henry. The wind moved through the leaves. And I knew. The story was complete. If you are watching this and you have ever been made to feel small, invisible, or replaceable, remember this. Quiet strength outlasts loud cruelty. Truth doesn't need permission. And dignity is not granted, it is claimed. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own worth, if you believe in justice that comes softly but firmly, share this story. Subscribe for more truths that don't shout, but stay. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Because stories like this are everywhere. They're just waiting to be seen.